Hey guys, C here. Thank you so much for clicking to join me in today's video. Sewing with silky fabrics such as rayon challis, silk, satin, or crepe can be very challenging, but with the right techniques, you can master beautiful, professional looking garments. Over the course of the last year, I think I have finally mastered what it takes to make beautiful garments using silky fabrics. So here are 10 essential tips to master sewing with silky fabrics. Now these tips are in 4 different categories. The first of which is preparation and cutting. The second is your sewing machine setup. Third is sewing techniques, and last of which is finishes. Now to kick things off, tip number 1 is one that I have learned the hard way, and that is to pre-wash your fabric. Now this one is new to my sewing practices. I think I've incorporated it into the last 6 months of my sewing practices, and so now without fail I always pre-wash my fabrics. Silky fabrics do shrink, so you want to go ahead, toss them in the wash. As soon as I get my fabric, whether it is delivered from offline or I come in from the fabric store, I go ahead and toss my silky fabrics in the wash. I put them on a gentle cycle cold water and I let them air dry, or you can toss them in the dryer on a low heat gentle cycle. Now the second tip in the preparation and cutting category is one I've definitely learned the hard way, and that is to use a pressing cloth. Now you want to use a pressing cloth because you want to avoid scorching your fabric. For me, I use a cheesecloth. If you don't have that, you can also use some scrap fabric, some fabric that you have in your stash. You just want to have another layer on top of your fabric when you're ironing. And key, make sure your iron is on a low heat setting when you're working with silky fabrics, because here again, you can damage your fabric with high heat. As an alternative, and in some cases I use my steamer, which I can still yield great results, but use a pressing cloth. Now, the third tip, and the last of which in our preparation and cutting category, is to cut on a single layer. And I know cutting absolutely sucks. We don't want to make the process any longer than what it has to be. But silky fabrics move and they're really hard to manage, especially when cutting. So cut on a single layer and use pattern weights or pins to stabilize your fabric, but definitely cut on a single layer. Now let's get into the sewing machine setup for the next few tips. And tip number 4 is to use a sharp or microtex needle. Key, okay? Key. Now I've been in a handful of situations where I'm sewing and everything is going great and I get a run or a snag in my fabric, and it's not because of me but because I've chose the wrong needle. So use a microtex or a sharp needle. What you want to be looking for is a 70-10 or an 80-12 needle. Next in the sewing machine setup is to choose the right thread. Now I'm a thread snob, okay? I do turn my nose up at the value pack thread or the Hobby Lobby thread. I'm so sorry, I'm guilty of it, but I really love quality thread. I have been in so many scenarios, especially not being able to use my serger or my pinking shears are too dull and not cutting accurately, where I have bust the seams of a garment because my thread is just not right. When sewing with silky fabrics, lightweight polyester or silk thread is also essential for strength and stability with those silky fabrics. It's key. It's a non-negotiable for me. I have only received the best results once I switched up my thread, especially with the silky fabrics, and Gutermann thread never fails me. That is my favorite brand of thread. Let me know in the comments if there's another thread I need to check out, but once again, I'm a thread snob and I'm gonna let you know if it sucks, okay? I'm gonna let you know if it's poo-poo, alright? Tip number 6 to master sewing with silky fabrics, and another tip in the sewing machine setup, is to use a shorter stitch length to avoid puckering. Now this tip was a little hard for me to nail down and actually see, and that's because I typically don't adjust my stitch length unless I'm working with a thicker fabric. I never really put 2 and 2 together that maybe I would have to do so when using a silky fabric either, but ideally you want to stay around 2 to 2.5 millimeters, and with that I've noticed I have no puckering in my fabrics. That is the absolute worst. Now depending on the intensity of the puckering, you can kind of press that out a little bit, okay? But when I go to turn at my side and I've got nothing but waves, no honey, we're not doing that. So 2 to 2.5 millimeters is the stitch length that you want to use for a silky fabric. Tip number 7 to master silky fabrics and the last in the sewing machine setup is to use a walking foot. You guys told me to use a walking foot and you definitely did not steer me wrong. That walking foot is amazing and it prevents your fabric, your slippery fabrics, from slipping. A walking foot helps feed slippery fabric evenly. It is a godsend, I must admit, and I am so thankful that you guys steered me in that direction. Now there's another foot that I purchased recently, and that is a Teflon foot. I haven't used it as of yet, but I purchased it to work with some leather fabrics. I'm going to use that on some slippery fabrics as well because the packaging said that it's perfect for that as well. So we'll see. Stay tuned. I'll let you know. Next, let's get into the sewing techniques. So I have 2 tips for sewing silky fabrics in the sewing techniques category, and the first of which is to use satin or silk pin. We do not want those little tiny holes in our garment. While they may be okay and unnoticeable to the untrained eye, we still want to create professional looking garments, and we're not buying stuff off the rack that has holes in it. So use satin or silk pins. Tip number 9 is to finish your seams neatly. Silky fabrics fray, and they fray a lot. They are messy to work with, and I know because I have a serger, but it's not serging right now, okay? We've talked about that before, okay? It'll be up and running in no time. I'll learn how to thread that thing. So that's not what we're here for. Finish your seams neatly. So if you do not have a serger, or you're like me and you're just a tad bit intimidated by it, I use pinking shears, I use French seams, and I use zigzag stitches. It's also easy to use pinking shears. I do have to make sure that I sharpen my blades ever so often, but pinking shears are great. Zigzag stitches, they use a lot of thread, honey, but it gets the job done for the most part. And then French seams. French seams are easy to accomplish. They definitely yield a nice and clean finish, but it does take a little more work. But the best bang for your buck is certainly going to be a serger. And I can't tell you from experience because we already talked about mine, but I'm sure it is a wonderful investment. Now, my last category for sewing with silky fabrics and my very last tip to master this technique is finishes. And tip number 10 is to press your seams with steam, not pressure. We don't want to flatten out our fabric. We want to use steam, and we want to lightly finger press. Once again, my steamer has never failed me. I actually prefer using my steamer, and if I do have to open up my seams, maybe my side seams or hemming or something like that, then I definitely use my pressing cloth, and my iron is on a low heat setting with high steam. And so there we have it. Those are my 10 essential tips to master sewing with silky fabrics. I have learned each of those through trial and error, especially over the last year. And I think considering all the beautiful fabrics that I've made over the last year, I prove that I won't steer you wrong, okay? Let me know a tip that you utilize in your sewing practice for silky fabrics. Maybe we could all learn from you. And let me know anything that I might have missed. As always, I love you guys for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.